Well, if you're anything like me, I think that maybe when you get face to face with Jesus, you may have some questions for him. And some of our questions will never be answered, of course, until that time. But our gospel reading today had two stories, both stories of healing. And in these stories, it was actually Jesus who was asking the questions. And the questions that Jesus asked were revealing. So what might we learn, and how might we answer the question that Jesus asks if he asked them of us? The very first question Jesus asked was this: will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders? Now, in some translations, including the one we read this morning, that's framed as a statement rather than a question. Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe. But either way, when you read it, it's almost striking about how callous and insensitive a question or statement this is. The man that Jesus speaks to has come on behalf of his son. His son is so sick, it looks like he's probably going to die. And contrary to the unconcern that Jesus first showed at the wedding that he went to with his disciples and his mother in John chapter 2, and he seems almost to dismiss Mary's concerns with, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour is not yet come." In this case, we're not talking about just a social faux pas, but a real and pressing concern, even a matter of life and death. And I think the fact that this man has come to Jesus in the first place already indicates he has a measure of faith. In fact, this is the first time recorded in John's gospel where Jesus is asked to heal someone. He hasn't actually healed anyone up until this point, but still this man comes to Jesus. And he puts aside all of the reasons that Jesus might turn him down. One of the barriers could be this man's identity. He's called, variously translated, a royal official or a nobleman or a government official or an official from the king's court. And the Greek is literally a kingly man. And so many scholars believe that he was probably a functionary of the court of Herod Antipas, who was then king of Galilee and also a client of the Romans. So this man's probably an official in Herod's court, and Herod is no friend of Jesus. In Luke's gospel, in fact, the story goes that Herod and the infamous Pilate didn't actually get along very well, but somehow they find mutual respect for one another and even become friends after they both try Jesus and allow him to be handed over and sentenced to death, even though neither one of them seems to think he deserves it. But still, even though he's an official in Herod's court, this man comes to Jesus. A royal official, we may expect, would either be wealthy or well-connected or both, so he may have also had multiple resources at his disposal to heal his son, and yet he still came to Jesus. All of those barriers, but this man has the bravery, dare we even say the faith, to overcome them and to come to Jesus and plead for his son's life. And Jesus' response is the underwhelming or even unkind, "Will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders?" Now, of course, we don't know tone when we read a story, and that's a pity in some cases, this one included. We don't know if Jesus looks at this man critically, as a representative of those perhaps who believed in Jesus in Jerusalem only because they saw the signs and wonders, but whom we read that Jesus would not trust himself to them, for he knew all people, and he did not need human testimony about them, for he knew what was in each person. That was at the end of John chapter 2. Or maybe Jesus looked on this man with compassion, and his response is better paraphrased, as one scholar puts it, "I wonder what it will take for you to believe. Will it be signs and wonders like everyone else?" Maybe Jesus isn't even asking the stressed out father at the end of his rope. Maybe Jesus is addressing the crowds and saying, "Is this just another opportunity for you to gawk at my power? Or will you ever have real faith?" Even the kind of faith that this official was already demonstrating. Perhaps Jesus' question comes because he's a little bit exasperated that this exceedingly difficult matter for this man has turned into a voyeuristic opportunity for the crowds to guess at what Jesus will do next. Is Jesus actually strong enough to heal someone? Do you want to put a wager on that? But whatever the spirit or tone of the question, Jesus does heal the man's son. In fact, the strength of this man's faith is demonstrated again because as soon as Jesus says to him, "Go, your son will live," he doesn't even bat an eye. He just goes back to where he came. And on the way, he's met with the news, of course, that his son was healed. He doesn't need to see the miracle. He believes on the strength of Jesus' word. But I wonder how we might respond to Jesus' question. What will it take for us to believe? Do we need to see signs and wonders? As Jesus says much later in the gospel, "Because you have seen me, you have believed, but blessed are those who have not yet seen and have believed." From what we know of Jesus, from the things we read in the Gospels, from the testimony we've heard from others, from what we've experienced in our own lives, do we believe? Or do we always demand more and more evidence? Do we need signs and wonders? Or do we take Jesus at his word, seeing evidence for how God loved the world, even in times when we don't quite understand, even in times when maybe we don't receive the miracle we'd been hoping for, or in times when we don't see? I wonder what it will take for you to believe Jesus may be asking us. What do we answer him? The second question comes from the second story of healing in a row. Now, the previous miracle had taken place in Galilee, and in Galilee, Jesus is warmly received in John's gospel. But the next healing story comes when Jesus has gone back to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, he doesn't tend to be received quite as well. And this story that starts in John chapter 5 is one of the more interesting in the story in the Gospels for a lot of reasons. For instance, one of my very favorite things about the story is the fact that Jesus spied that particular man there at the pool. He's been incapacitated, we read, for 38 years. But it said that there were crowds of people there waiting to be healed, and yet Jesus has the eyes to see this one man among the many and singles him out to speak to. And he has a question for him. Do you want to get well? Or in the King James, wilt thou be made whole? An interesting question Jesus asks. And you might think the man's response would be emphatically, yes. He's been lying by that pool, widely believed to have healing properties, for almost 4 decades. And the only reason he seems to still be waiting there after all that time would be that he's hoping for some kind of miracle. But he doesn't answer yes. Instead, he points out all the problems he sees in maybe I won't be healed. The sick man said, "Sir, when the water is stirred, I don't have anybody to put me in the pool. By the time I get there, someone else is already in." Maybe that's why he doesn't see any hope for him to be healed, any possibility of anything different happening in his life to him, or any kind of future for himself beyond sitting at the pool day after day, hoping for a miracle, but always being edged out by others who were either more vigorous or who had someone there to help them. That he doesn't immediately jump at Jesus' question and say, yes, I would love to be healed. Is it because of his confession, which I think is troubling in and of itself, I don't have anybody to put me in the pool, that he doesn't actually think there's anyone in the world who cares about him or who's willing to help him? So he doesn't trust that Jesus might care about him, even though he's clearly singled him out among this crowd of people gathered at the pool who are also hoping or praying for their own miracles. And the other fascinating thing about this story is this man's response to being healed. In the Gospel at John, he's at best an ambiguous figure, and at worst, he intentionally betrays Jesus to the authorities. And his story leaves me wondering, did he actually get well? Now, we know, of course, that he picked up his mat, the one thing that had supported him throughout his long illness as he waited by the pool, paralyzed, and he walked away. But there are still questions that linger over the story. I've already mentioned this, but he seemed to be utterly alone in the world. There was no one, he said, to help him into the pool. And we're left wondering, especially considering it says he's been there 38 years, is there anyone waiting for him at home to get better? Any parents or siblings, maybe a spouse or even friends who were hoping and praying for him to get his miracle? Is there anyone left to care that he's been healed of his long illness? One of the connections between illness and healing in the Bible is that illness in many cases, and illness also of many kinds, it isolates people, it breaks down their community. We actually see this throughout the scriptures. For instance, when Peter's mother-in-law is healed by Jesus, these days we're left to grapple in confusion with the fact that the very first thing she does is get out of bed, and it says she starts to serve them. Couldn't the poor woman rest, we might wonder? Did they really need to eat sandwiches that badly right then? But when the story's told in her context, that little detail indicates she has been restored to community. It was a very big deal to her to provide hospitality. And so when she's healed, it's the first thing she does. When a young boy has died and left his mother, who was a widow stricken, and Jesus raises the boy to life, it says he gives him back to his mother, and community is restored. The story is told of a man possessed by many demons, and he was isolated from his community until Jesus healed him. And at the end of his story, he asks if he maybe could follow Jesus. But Jesus sends him back to his community to tell them his story. And even the story we just read, the son of the royal official, there's a communal aspect to his healing as well. This is what we read. While he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news his boy was living. And when he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. And then his father realized that this was the exact time that Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And then it says, so he and his whole household believed. So the boy's healing presents a chance for this entire household, a community, to believe in Jesus. The boy was healed, his community was restored to him, and they're restored to each other, and they're restored to Jesus. And I think we feel this connection between illness and community as well. Illness can isolate us. Sometimes illness means we're in the hospital and people find it difficult to come and see us. Or if we're not in the hospital, people avoid talking to us because maybe they don't really know what to say. Or they don't understand that we're going through something difficult and they say something insensitive. Sometimes there are illnesses that we still feel shame about getting. For instance, mental illnesses, of course, top that list, but there's some physical illnesses we might get that carry stigma as well. AIDS, for instance, is very stigmatized. One can argue that some people feel guilt when they get COVID-19 because there's such a personal responsibility narrative out there that it's your responsibility not to catch it, when it's really just a virus that goes around. One of the commentators I listen to regularly on the scriptures is a man who is confined to a wheelchair because as a teenager, he got bone cancer and he had to have both his legs amputated. And he tells a story often of how when he was in the hospital as a teenager, and he said not one of his friends came to see him. But he's very gracious. He says they are not bad people, and they even weren't bad friends. They just didn't know what to say. And he makes that point often to demonstrate how important it is for those of us who love God to just show up at places when there's illness or injury or grief or worry, even if you don't really know what to say or do, because illness is isolating. It destroys our physical health. Of course we know that. When people are ill, they're often in pain. Sometimes being ill means you have to have a very difficult treatment. We know all of that about it, but an unintended side effect is that we often lose or weaken our sense of community. And this man, the one that had lain by the pool with purported healing powers for probably the majority of his life, it is still unclear whether or not he gets well. After he picks up his mat and walks away, he goes immediately to the temple, which is a great first step because the other thing his illness would have isolated him from was worshiping in the temple and worshiping God for as long as he had it, which is a tragic side effect. But there, he's confronted by the religious authorities who begin to question him. And notice they don't question him about how he got well. It doesn't really seem they care all that much about that part, but why he's carrying his mat. And immediately he blames Jesus for this, although he doesn't really know his name. But it makes me question whether or not he really was made whole. And later, Jesus does come to him in the temple after having faded away into the crowd after the man picked up his mat and walked. And he says to him, in the words of Eugene Peterson's The Message, "You look wonderful. You're well. Don't return to a sinning life or something worse may happen to you." Isn't it curious that Jesus urges him to stop sinning in this, a healing story, rather than in the conversation that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman whom we met last week? But I think the reason he does it has something to do with this connection between healing and community. You see, in the Gospel of John, sin is defined by having the wrong relationship. So people who are sinning are not in a right relationship with Jesus. And this man, even though Jesus does in fact heal his physical illness, does not appear, at least as near as I can tell, to join the community that Jesus is building here on earth, of people who become part of God's family with Jesus at the center. Andrew and Philip joined the community in John chapter 1 after they met Jesus, and they went and found Peter and Nathanael, and those guys joined too. Mary, Jesus' own mother, seems to respond in this way to the challenge that Jesus presented her in John 2 by also becoming a part of the community and becoming a disciple of Jesus. And the woman that Jesus meets at the well in John chapter 4 becomes a part of the community, and she brings along a great number of people from her villages as well, and they join too. And we even have evidence throughout the gospel that even Nicodemus eventually came along for the ride. Late to the party perhaps, but I think he got there all the same. But this man whom Jesus sought out, kind of like he sought out the woman at the well in Samaria, that Jesus sought out among the crowds of people waiting at this particular pool and who experienced even a miracle of being able to pick up his mat and walk after decades of waiting for just that to happen, he doesn't seem to join the procession. And whether he intends to harm Jesus by doing so or not, he actually ends up landing Jesus more firmly on the radar of people who want to harm him. We read, "So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, 'My Father is always at work, even to this day, and I too am working.' And for this reason, they tried all the more to kill him." Which brings Jesus' question to the man, "Do you want to be made well?" into even sharper relief, because it doesn't seem that the man actually did get well, at least not in the sense that he was restored to community or given a new community or that he stopped sinning, because he never developed a right relationship with Jesus. And that seems to me to be a pretty tragic outcome from a story that could, at least initially, have offered us so much hope. Will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders? Do you want to get well? How do we answer these questions? Do we join Jesus' community and believe in him? Do we find the wholeness and healing we experience by having a community of siblings who are also fellow believers in Jesus? Jesus puts the question to us, and now we are left to answer. Would you bow with me in a word of prayer? O God, who seeks us out, sometimes we are slow to believe in your power, even when we see evidence of the ways that you are at work around us each and every day. Open our eyes to see and our hearts to believe in you, and help us to be reconciled to the community which you are building, which starts when we have a right relationship with you. Amen. We have waited patiently for God, and he has heard our cry. He has set our feet on solid ground and kept us steady as we journey together. We are the people of God, shaped and molded by the story of God, freed from our sins by the work of Jesus Christ. God calls us to be his servants, and God will guide us and keep us as we go now into the world. O God, you have put a new song into our mouths, a song of praise to you. May the world know that you have sent us by the song of your love in our lives. Amen. Go in peace.